This video is mainly for Christians. However, both Muslims and atheists are welcome to take a look at it too. Some good information in here. Actually, I really would like some Muslims to watch this because it deals with the resurrection witness account. Paul gives us a witness account, or a witness list, I should say, in 1 Corinthians. Most scholars agree that Paul did in fact write 1 Corinthians. Virtually no liberal or even conservative, even the most critical scholars of the New Testament will agree that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians. In fact, they agree he wrote Romans and I think 2 Corinthians and a couple of the other ones they completely agree with. Now, most scholars place the dating on the writing of 1 Corinthians at about 53 to 57 AD or so. I like even numbers, so I'm going to say 55 AD, which is an estimated, depending on when you think Jesus rose from the dead, from 30 AD to 33 AD. It's about 25 years. So about, give or take, 25 years after the fact, after Jesus died and rose again, this was written about him. Well, most historical figures actually don't have something written about them less than 100 years or more. In fact, most historical figures have 200, 300, 400, even 1,000 years later, people write about them. And Jesus is the only historical figure that has something that early written about them. So the information we have here is very, very early, but it actually gets even more early still. But I'm kind of jumping the gun here. I think maybe we should read the text real quick first. Alright, 1 Corinthians 15:3. Alright, for I delivered to you, first of all, that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he was seen by Caiaphas or Cephas, I've heard it both ways, then by the 12. After that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present, but some have fallen asleep. After that he was seen by James, then by the apostles, then last of all he was seen by me, is pretty much what he says, and that's it. For I delivered to you that was first given to me. It's a very interesting statement for him to say, because what he's saying here is the information I'm about to give to you, I already given to you before, and before that I got it. And when he's saying this, is about 25 years after the resurrection. So that means that he first gave it to them even earlier than that, which means this is really early information. However, he first received it himself, so it's very early information. Now this is pretty cool because a lot of scholars date this information to 5 years after the resurrection. There's some more liberal ones that actually date it 3 years after the resurrection, which is pretty crazy. How they come to this number is that they estimate about 3 years after the resurrection Paul was converted to Christianity, and then shortly after that, in his own writings, Paul says that he went and visited both Peter and James concerning the the gospel message that he was spreading, and if he was, getting it right, and if they were all in sync. And then they date that event to about 5 years after the resurrection. And then later, Paul a second time goes and talks to Peter, James, and John about the message that he's spreading, and to see if they're in sync still. And they were. So yeah, this is very, very early information. No historical figure has information even remotely this close to their actual life. Now this list is very interesting because you got Cephas or Caiaphas, depending on how you want to say it. I don't know how it's supposed to actually be said, but that's Peter. And you have James on the list. And both of those are the two people that Paul originally went to go talk to. Well, it's interesting because James was the brother of Jesus, and he thought he was cuckoo. He thought Jesus was nuts. It says so right in the Gospels that his family, his brothers, thought he was crazy when he was doing his ministry and stuff. So all of a sudden we have James thinking he's nuts, and then we have James believing he's the Messiah and Son of God, and one of the head leaders of the Jerusalem church. How did that happen? Well, it's explained right here. He saw the resurrected Jesus. That's the only explanation that we have for how James could have gone from huge skeptic to believer. So that's pretty crazy. I mean, so right there is a huge witness right there. Now, midway through the list, we get some really good information, which is, after that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present, but some have fallen asleep. Now, this is pretty cool, because how would he know that some remain to the present? How would he know that some fell asleep? If he was given this information, then gave it to the Corinth church, and then has now given it to him a second time, the only way he could know if some were still awake and some still asleep, meaning some were still alive and some dead, is if he himself investigated all 500 of them. So that means he went and he talked to them, and so he knows that this information is true. Now think about it. 25 years or so after the resurrection, Paul is making a claim that 500 people witnessed the risen Jesus, and that majority of them are still alive. Why would he say that when those people are in the position to go investigate this for themselves? Well, clearly he's actually inviting them to do it themselves, and clearly he himself did it to know it's true. So therefore, the probability that it's true is pretty good. And this is really early information. The last person on the list is Paul himself. Here we have a guy who used to murder Christians. He was a persecutor of Christians, and he went from murdering Christians to spreading the gospel message and suffering a lot of hardships for it, including being nearly stoned to death, I think twice. He says in his writings that his body had scars all over it, and he was imprisoned many times, and he just suffered and suffered for Christ. And his reasoning for it is that he witnessed the risen Jesus himself. Now you might say that in the Gospels, the first witnesses to the risen Jesus were his women followers. Why are they not on this list, and why is Peter the first one? Well, I don't know why Peter's the first one, but his women followers, back then, female witnesses were not taken very seriously. They couldn't even testify in court. So I'm pretty sure that's why the information was omitted from this. And not only that, but what we have here is, in all likelihood, a early apologetic quick list that was given to people. Paul did say that he was first given it, then he gave it twice. So it's probably the same information that was given throughout. All the leaders of the churches and whatnot probably gave this list. And keep in mind that majority of the people on the list were still alive, and it can be investigated. Now, one thing that makes this very important is that Muslims have a lot of claims about Jesus, and their information is about 600 years after the fact, whereas this information dates to about 5 years after the fact, after the death and resurrection, by people who knew Jesus personally. And Paul, who claims that he did witness Jesus, but let's say you don't even believe that, well, he knew the disciples who knew Jesus personally and intimately for 3 years. So Muhammad didn't know Jesus at all. He's not a witness to anything. He didn't know anybody who was witness to anything. He didn't know anybody who knew anybody who was witness to anything. You can keep going with that. And so yeah, so this is very important information. And so yeah, this is one reason why I'm a Christian and why I'm not a Muslim.